Today on the show, I am chatting with Mr. James Cargas. He is a smart energy expert and president of New Energy LLC based in Houston, Texas. James and I chat about his path from Detroit, Michigan to the energy capital of the world, which is Houston. We discuss how his family weathered the Arctic blast that hit Houston mid February and the ins and outs of the Texas power grid controversy. All of this and so much more. So stay tuned. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today, I have Mr. James Cargas, a smart energy expert and president of New Energy LLC based in Houston, Texas. James, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sandy, great to be here.
Great. I very much appreciate you taking the time out to do this today. I always like to tell people kind of how we know each other, and I work for a nonprofit based in Houston, and you had taken some LinkedIn classes from them last year, and I didn't know that. And I saw this article you'd written for the Washington Monthly on LinkedIn, and I realized we were both connected. And so I reached out to you, and you were gracious enough to accept. So I always like to share how I've met people or how I know them.
Mhm.
So you currently live in Houston, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yes, and you went through the snow storm a couple of weeks ago. How's everything going there for you?
Much better.
Much better.
And, by way of background, I actually grew up in the Detroit area in Michigan,
Oh, really?
where the definition of snow is a little bit different.
Yes, it is.
They would call this a dusting.
That's right.
But, the bottom line is for 3 or 4 days in a row, temperatures were below freezing.
Right.
And while we didn't have a whole lot of snow to make snowmen out of, it was bitter cold.
Right.
And unlike northern states, Texas is more geared towards the blistering 100 degree a day
Yes.
summertime, and winter is often an afterthought.
That's exactly
And
right.
I think that's a lot of what we saw happen
Right.
here last week.
Right.
How we're doing personally, um, we have a fireplace, we have a gas stove to cook with, and my wife is a prolific candle collector.
Which I'm sure now you appreciate.
I've never said anything derogatory, and now I'm singing her praises. Uh, but that we had our powers off of 42 hours straight.
Wow.
And probably one of the questions I have for the utility industry is what exactly do they mean by rolling blackout? Because nothing really rolled.
Yeah.
Once you were off the power, you were off for days. And um, it would have been a lot better to give us heat, for a few hours,
Right.
um, and then take us back off. But we were out for 42 hours straight. It was bitter cold inside the house. Since you used to live in Houston, you know that one or two times a winter we do get a frost, and you have
Yes.
to wrap your tropical plants outside so they
Yes.
don't get frostbit, because they're really not, they really belong in Mexico and Central America, but they're
That's
beautiful, so
right.
we grow them here. Um, my indoor plants died.
Oh, wow.
So you have a beautiful plant right behind you there.
Yes.
Um, I didn't think that I needed to protect my indoor plants.
That's really crazy. I mean, that really is. But
Mhm.
you're right. I had back in I think 2017, we had a couple of days where it was below freezing there, and I lost some palm trees in the house that I was living in. I lost some palm trees out front. Before we get into all of that, let's kind of go back really quickly, and I want to talk about. You said you grew up in Detroit. So, what is your background? How did you get from Detroit, Michigan, the city that makes cars,
Mhm.
to energy in Houston, Texas? Like how did that happen?
Well, when I was at going to University of Michigan, I interned for a Democratic congressman. Spent a summer in Washington D.C. and really fell in love with the area. And so when I graduated, my heart was set on going to law school, but he offered me a job.
Wow.
And so American University's Washington College of Law made
Mhm.
it very clear that if I don't take this job, I'm a fool. They will hold a seat for me next year.
Oh, that's really cool
Yeah, it
too.
was very cool of them. And so I worked for a congressman for a year, moved to DC, went to law school in DC at American for 3 years. And, you know, it just kind of one job leads to another.
Sure.
And like 12 years go by. But how I got to energy was that I needed a job, and
Don't we
the
all?
well, you're a student, and DC's not a cheap place to live. um, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was one of the few federal agencies that paid their law clerks. And so I interviewed and got a job there. And this is back in about 1990.
Okay.
And there's a Bush administration. And so there was a Texan by the name of Martin Alday, who was chairman of the commission. And it really opened my eyes up to, I mean, I'd always been an environmental,
Right.
passionate about the environment, and really opened my eyes up to energy as a business, as in every other industry. Everything we do in society depends upon energy,
Hmm.
affordable energy, reliable energy. Um, Plants will get put in certain geographies because they can get access to cheap energy.
Right.
Um, you know, computer, you know, um, storage centers, Amazon, Google, they will locate in a place where they can get affordable, reliable energy. Um, it is critical to everything we do. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty interesting area.
Right.
And so in law school is 3 years. That's 2 summers. So the
Right.
first summer and year, actually, doing part-time during the school year, I worked for the FERC. And then the next summer, I went to West Virginia and worked for a interstate gas company.
No.
And then I graduated and worked for a large law firm. And the interstate gas company needed someone to do environmental compliance. And so I went off to West Virginia for 3 years, and I did my passionate environmental compliance work for an energy company, which was the
Wow.
best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And then I left West Virginia and came back to DC to work in the Clinton Gore White House at a endeavor they call the President's Council for Sustainable Development.
Yes.
And that's when we were talking about wind and solar and
Right.
hybrid cars and all this newfangled technology. Um, and I ended up working for the Clinton administration at the US Department of Energy when Bill Richardson was Secretary of Energy,
Mm-hmm.
and a Texan by the name of Bob G. Was head of the Fossil Energy Office. And I built some lifelong friendships there. I thought I was going to be in the Gore White House. That didn't happen.
No, it
Um,
didn't.
and so I moved to the energy capital of the United States, of the world, really,
Right.
Houston, Texas. And I met my wife here. And so, as I say, the West is history,
Yes.
and it all worked out.
And it's interesting. You moved to the energy capital of the world, which is Houston, which is
Mhm.
true. Yet Houston didn't have any energy for several days. Let's talk a little bit about let's talk a little bit about because a lot of people out there, the news, people I know, just everybody
Mhm.
is throwing out their thoughts as to what caused it. And sometimes I get tired of trying to fight the narrative because I'm like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about, really. And and a lot of people in Houston and in Texas didn't really know, didn't really understand either. So let's talk about how the energy grid for Texas is so different from everybody else.
Okay. I might actually suggest that it's not so different
Okay.
as people think. That I guess the main difference is that every other grid And sometimes people talk about the Eastern interchange and the Western interchange and then
Right.
Texas. Um, for me, it's more about the different independent system operators.
Okay.
So if you live in Kansas, Oklahoma, the Southwest Power Pool runs your grid in
Okay.
14 states. If you live in Louisiana all the way up to Michigan, the MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operator, runs your grid.
Okay.
Um, PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, Maryland, Jersey, runs that grid.
Right.
And then El Paso is actually part of the New Mexico grid, and that is the Western Electric Coordinating Council.
Right.
And so these are the people who actually manage and balance the grid, because the fascinating thing about electricity is right now we don't have the ability to store it in volumes.
Right.
And so the fact that my lights are on right now is that there is a plant generating right now to make that
Okay.
happen.
Okay.
Um, and you have to have that generation equal the demand needed. If you have too much generation, the wires get too hot and you get a surge and equipment burns out.
Right.
If you have too little generation, there's not enough of a current and things won't run.
Is that why brownouts happen where the electricity goes on and off?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's a sign of unreliability. Correct. Very good. Yeah. So ERCOT is runs the Texas grid, and
Okay.
that stands for the Energy Reliability Council of Texas.
Except for El Paso. They run everything in Texas except for
Right.
El
Well,
Paso.
actually, the Northern Panhandle, parts of that are part of the SPP,
Okay.
and there's actually East Texas, and even where the Woodlands are, which is north
Yes.
of Houston. That's actually part of MISO,
Okay.
and
Interesting.
so it's really not. It really goes by operational lines, not by
Okay.
arbitrary political lines.
Okay.
Um, is connected. In fact, this is one of the fun facts I like to share with you and your listeners, is that ERCOT is actually connected to the rest of the world. It is not an island.
Which is what a lot of people have been saying, is that it's just not connected to anybody else.
Right. So the electrical grid runs an alternating current, AC. What ERCOT does to avoid jurisdiction is it converts the AC to DC, direct current, moves it across state line, and then let's say SPP will then convert the DC back into AC.
Oh. It's kind of like I worked for a trucking company, and Dr. Pepper needed bottle caps from Mexico where they were being produced, or bottles. So they hired us. We drove to the border, had an empty trailer. Mexican drivers and storage people then loaded that trailer and we drove it back to Mexico. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. There's a legal reason why you did the inefficient thing. Yes. Nevertheless, power does flow
Right.
out in and out of Texas, and in fact, for a brief moment in time, and on Monday, SPP was actually able to give ERCOT a little bit of power, and Mexico actually gave ERCOT quite a bit of power as well,
Wow.
until the polar vortex got down to Mexico and they needed it for themselves.
Right.
So that, I think, is one of the fun facts that's not really getting out, is that the ERCOT did benefit a little bit from imported power.
So did Mexico, they were like, we're going to give you this power. It didn't just, so that was,
Well, we had to pay them for it.
we had to, oh, of course. But I mean, but, but I mean, they could have said, no, we don't care about you.
That's not the way it works.
No, it's not the way it
Because when they
works.
need power, we sell it to them.
Okay. And
Um,
that's not, I don't think I've ever heard that mentioned in anything.
right.
Uh, so that's fascinating too. So did the Woodlands lose power
A little
last time?
bit.
A little bit.
So SPP and MISO, um, even El Paso, they all had blackouts too.
Okay.
Oklahoma and even Fishing, Nebraska really got pounded, or Kansas really got
Yeah.
huge blackouts. One of the major differences was that their blackouts, because they're further north, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of their generations further north was more weatherized. And so they were out for hours while we were out for days.
Right. So now let's talk about why you guys were out for days. Let's dive into that complicated scenario.
Um, well, let's begin. So the thrust of my article was that this was primarily a human problem,
Right.
human error. And I qualify with primary because there are things that can be improved in terms of our systems. But let's begin with the fact that Facebook and the weather forecasters realized something big was going to happen as early as February 5.
Mm-hmm.
ERCOT did not really make any public announcements until February 11,
And when did the storm hit?
uh, Valentine's Day, February
Oh,
14,
that's right. That's
Sunday
right.
night.
Okay.
Things got really rough. In fact, actually Sunday during the day there was some snow, and I took some fun pictures outside of the novel snow, not realizing what was about to happen. Um, so you know there was a period of time when better preparation could have been made,
Mm-hmm.
and their forecast was that the peak demand would be about 67 gigawatts. Well, peak demand was actually about almost 70 gigawatts.
Okay.
So they were close, but they were still off. And so there's some forecasting issues that they didn't quite understand what was coming. Um, and when it hit, generators who were not weatherized, who promised to provide ERCOT, when they say we have a demand of 67 gigawatts,
Right.
ERCOT goes and lines up that generation. Of those plants that promised ERCOT on Sunday night that they would deliver that 67 gigawatts, about 30, almost half,
Mm-hmm.
failed to deliver. And they failed to deliver for a number of reasons. Now, what did wind turbines freeze up? Yes, they did. Of that 30 gigawatts, four gigawatts of wind did not deliver. The rest, 26, was natural gas generation.
Okay.
And to put that in perspective, ERCOT plans on about 17% of its total needs in the wintertime will be served by wind. And the vast majority of the rest, almost 60%, by natural gas generation.
Okay.
And so you had the largest part of the ERCOT portfolio failing at a higher rate.
Wow.
So why did gas generation fail? Some of the turbines froze up. Different pipes and mechanisms just were not heated, were not protected,
Right.
and they froze up. What I found educational was that the pipelines themselves had delivery issues. So in other words, you can have a generator that's weatherized and ready to go, but no natural gas supply to run it.
Oh, okay.
Because within the gas stream, there are liquids
Right.
just naturally.
So,
And when the pipes bend and turn in those little corners,
mm-hmm.
liquids will collect. Well, they froze and blocked the pipeline in some places. Typically, gas is stored in the ground. And when you pull it out of the ground at the wellhead,
Mm-hmm.
that's a place where a lot of freezing happened. And so that gas was trapped in the ground and could not make it into the pipeline.
How do they handle that situation, say up in North Dakota or even Nebraska when it's
They
cold?
have warmers on the wellhead.
Oh, okay.
They insulate the pipes, especially in the bends, knowing that's a place that could potentially freeze.
Right.
Um, the other thing is some natural gas pipelines, the compressor motors that move the gas along were
Hmm.
electric. So when they lost power, there's
They
nothing
could.
moving the gas.
That's right. It couldn't work.
So and finally, when it's cold out, what did we do? We had a fireplace going. A lot of my friends had gas fireplaces. We did all of our cooking on a gas stove.
Right.
Um, so the residential demand for gas skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And the way the tariffs are written is that priority is given to hospitals and critical need. Secondary priority is given to residential uses, and generators behind that. Now, large industrial plants like refineries are further down the line, um, for the most part.
Right.
So they get curtailed first. But gas generators often got lost gas that they had purchased, got rerouted to residential or hospital use.
Wow. So, what could be what would be some of the fixes that could happen to prevent that again?
Better planning. It's back. There was a huge freeze here in 2011.
Right.
It wasn't days. It was a good solid day, not 4 days.
Right.
And ERCOT suffered some uh, problems then with generation, and the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and an organization called NERC, which is North American Energy Reliability Council,
Right.
issued a joint report that's 300 some pages long, making recommendations. And their primary recommendation was that even though it only freezes infrequently in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
you still have to weatherize.
Sure.
You still need to be ready for that 1 or 2 days worth of really cold weather that you get every year.
Right.
In fact, reading about El Paso Electric, one of the reasons El Paso Electric was only offline for a few hours was not so much that they're outside of ERCOT jurisdiction, it's because they spent the money to weatherize their plants and their pipes and be ready.
Wow.
They
And
had a
they,
plan.
yeah, and they're on the New Mexico border.
Right. Mexican
Uh,
border too.
yeah, Mexican border too.
Imagine
So
that Canadian weather shutting down,
I know. I thought it
sitting on
was
the border.
crazy. I thought it was crazy to see snow on Galveston Beach. Like that was crazy. And it wasn't just a dusting either. Like that was just wild.
Right.
So let's talk about, there's a lot of talk about regulated and deregulated. When I moved to Houston, when I lived in Memphis, and still to this day, you have one electric company. And when I moved to Houston, everybody was like, what electric company are you going to go with? And I'm like, I didn't know I had a choice. And there are like all these choices out there, which seems great, but I would have been, because before I left, I was on that plan because I didn't understand it, where the pricing changes daily or by minute, depending on the usage. I would have been one of those people with like a $9,000 bill
No. Um,
because the usage went up for me. Like I got on that plan. It didn't explain it. And I got on the plan, and the first month was like June. And my electric bill, which was normally like $100, $200, was $600.
mhm.
And they're like, here's an app, and you have to look at what the price of electricity is. And if it's high, you need to cut your usage down.
Mhm.
N-
Okay. Yeah. So that's correct. So let's start with a little bit of vocabulary.
Yeah.
Um, in 2002, Texas did deregulate their energy markets.
Okay.
I wish they had used the word restructuring.
And what does deregulation mean, though,
So
to people?
deregulation, remember the airline industry got deregulated. There were all these FAA controls and regulations in place, and Ronald Reagan got rid of them.
Okay.
Here in Texas, what they did was they didn't remove regulations, they restructured things. So just like in Memphis,
Ah.
there's minority monopoly power company.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we had. Every place was a monopoly. You had to buy from one company who owned the generation, they owned the wires, they owned the
Right.
meter, and they did everything. Um, by restructuring in 2002, now the generators were separate from the utilities that own the wires, are
Oh,
separate from the retail electric providers that basically have the meter to provide energy that you get to choose from. And it's all regulated, especially the utility in the middle, which is a monopoly still, that owns the wires, because they have to provide non-discriminatory, reliable service to everyone. And the Public Utility
oh,
Commission makes sure of that.
okay.
Um, so think restructuring next time you hear deregulation.
Right.
Now, in your case, you were on a variable rate plan.
Yeah.
I always recommend to my people to get fixed rates.
Yeah.
Um,
That was the only time I'd ever done that. And I didn't understand. They don't make the writing user friendly. And I didn't understand until I got my first bill. And I still
right,
didn't understand.
right.
And I got really mad.
And there's also a lot of variety where um, when I think of variable rate plans, a lot of times it's more about time of day,
Yes. Yes.
because power is priced higher, especially in the summertime,
Mm-hmm.
during the week, during the day.
Yes.
In the evenings and weekends, power is really cheap.
Right.
And so to bring down your overall price, some companies will give you a break on the evenings or weekends. Some even make it free
I've
on the
seen
evenings and
those. Yeah. I've
weekends.
seen those ads.
Yeah, so that encourages people to run their laundry at night
Right.
and charge your electric car at night, not during the day.
Right.
Um, it sounds like your variable rate plan was a true variable rate plan that was kind of tied into the market price.
It was.
Even then, there'll be certain limits.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you will not be exposed to the $9,000 bills. Um, if the New York Times and some other uh, media outlets have done reports about these outrageous bills that a few Texans are getting, every single one of those customers went with a company called Griddy, as in
Never heard
grid.
of it. Yeah. Ah, never heard of it.
Yeah, they basically allow a retail customer to access a wholesale market.
Oh, wow.
So when the wholesale prices are really low, the savings gets passed on.
Yeah.
But guess what? When the prices spike in the summer or the prices spike in the winter, you're also subject to that.
Right.
And the idea behind Griddy, like you said, to have an app where if prices are spiking in the summertime, turn your air conditioning off,
Mm-hmm.
you know, cut your use down so that you're enjoying the upside of the cheap price, but not the
Right.
downside of a spike. Well, when it's 12 degrees
Can't do
outside,
that.
you're not turning your heat off.
No. And you're not turning your AC off either when it's 114 degrees outside.
No, but a lot of people have electric heat.
Yeah.
In fact, we have gas heat, except that it's run by a computer and it's monitored by an electrical system. So we had no heat.
Yeah.
Um, so that doesn't happen. That feedback doesn't happen. So those Griddy customers, in fact, Griddy actually sent out a notice, I believe, on Monday, the 15th,
Right.
telling their customers to leave.
Oh, wow.
Basically telling their customers it's going to be bad. Go sign up with somebody else right now.
Oh my, but that's like impossible to do.
No, you can do it online. Well, if you have power, you can do it online.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying I'm about to have a car accident. Go, that's not actually not a very good example, um, but yeah,
But I
in the
mean, yeah, they knew that their rates were about to go through the stratosphere, and the only way they could protect their customers is to not have customers. That's how.
wow,
But so a lot of those newspaper articles are from one
from
company in
okay,
one plan.
yeah,
Now, some variable rate customers also got high bills as well. I'm not going to belittle that.
right.
Um, but I always have my clients and my people get a fixed rate,
I
100%
learned I
green,
I learned my lesson definitely.
100% green. And
100%
that's one
green.
of the neat things about choice is that because of choice, there are retail electric providers who will give you 100% green power. They will give you free weekends.
Hmm.
That will give you a free Nest thermostat if you sign up with them. Um, and you can pick and choose what you want.
Right,
If you don't care about green energy, you don't have to buy it. If you like green energy like I do, you
right.
buy it. And with a monopoly company, you don't have those options.
Yeah, that's very true.
Uh,
S-
One footnote to all that, only 85% of ERCOT was restructured.
Really?
15%, which includes Austin and San Antonio, are still monopoly municipal power companies. So if you live in Austin, you must buy power from Austin
Right,
Energy. And they had the same blackouts as everybody
right,
else.
right.
Did not make a difference.
Can individuals do anything in the future to protect themselves? Let's say that none of the providers do anything to weatherize. Can individuals do anything to protect themselves in the event of another freeze like this?
So my wife is lobbying heavily for a whole house generator. There's several $1,000s,
Hmm.
and they automatically kick on when your power goes out, and they run off natural gas.
How long do they last? As long as you have natural
Yeah,
gas?
as long as you have natural gas, they will run. And we actually had a neighbor behind us. We as we froze, we could hear their generator going
Wow.
nonstop. Um, that's one solution. I am lobbying to get solar panels on our roof connected to wall-mounted batteries.
Okay.
To the extent that solar is a daytime source,
Right.
we need those batteries to run the refrigerator and
Right.
whatever we need, the lights and things at nighttime. My solutions cost a little bit more.
Yeah. What about people that maybe can't do those options? Is there anything that um, other people can do that can't afford those options? Is there anything, or are they just at the mercy of what happens?
I mean, our society is not only very, very dependent upon energy and electricity in particular,
Hmm.
but we're moving into a more electrified world
Right.
with electric vehicles and these things being everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, electricity is becoming more and more part of our daily lives. So I don't think there is
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I was when things like this happen, like in the middle of the summer and in the middle of the winter, I always wonder, how did the pioneers survive? Especially like up in Montana and Wyoming, and they're in a log cabin that's not insulated, and I can't even imagine how they survived, and a lot of them didn't survive during those
Mhm.
horrific snowstorms. um but I do try to think that people have survived things before. We are just more accustomed to conveniences.
Mhm.
And I've also heard it said that like one of the worst things that ever happened was the advent of the air conditioning, because we suddenly became used to air conditioning as opposed to being able to withstand higher temperatures outside. Our bodies, we became a little lax.
you're right, but at the
Yes.
same time, like you said, a lot of them didn't survive.
Right.
And so, one of the benefits of having electrified modern society is people who are, for whatever medical reason, sometimes able to work and do things that they couldn't do 150 years ago.
Exactly.
Um, One of the really sad parts of this is that we were talking about regulation and
Hmm.
economics and engineering um, in markets. um, there's a human component here too.
Sure.
And while ERCOT perhaps actually did function as intended on an economic level, there is some significant collateral damage. And right now, I hear the number here in Harris County is up to 35 deaths.
Oh my God.
That is not only people dying from hypothermia, but um, there's at least one Vietnam veteran I read about who ran out of oxygen.
Yeah.
He depends upon electricity for an oxygen generator, and he had some spare tanks, but they didn't last.
Right.
Um, so it's, and I think that's the role of government. While I believe in free markets and capitalism, there needs to be a boundary upon that,
Right.
because power going out, you've heard a lot about some of these power companies that ran for 4 days, made a fortune in money. Well,
Hmm.
some of the companies who failed to run lost a fortune and will be filing bankruptcy.
Right.
Um, but end of the day, people were collateral damage.
Sure.
Businesses were collateral damage. Lack of economic activity. I mean, you talk about the frontier. Um, my initial thought was I put my Eagle Scout skills to work and we got through it. But then the more I thought about it, my Boy Scout troop believed in toaster ovens and coffee machines and hot shower. This was really pioneering.
Yeah, it really was.
Is so I think that I would like to see when reform comes in that be the emphasis of new government regulation and changes made to have a focus on the human element.
Right. I agree with that. I do. Everybody talks about the overreach of government or whatever. And I do believe fundamentally it is the government's job to take care of its citizens. You know, how much, how little, yes, we can argue that, but it is their responsibility because if they can't take care of us, how are we going to take care of ourselves too? Is
Mhm.
really what, I think about that as well. James, thank you so much for doing this. I really
Well,
appreciate
thank
that.
you for the invite. It was great coincidence. By the way, because of those LinkedIn classes I took, I've
Hmm.
gotten pretty good at LinkedIn. And for several days running, my article was the number one story on LinkedIn.
It was, it
Yeah.
was. And
So
that's
thank
how
you.
and again, that's how I found you. I saw your article and I went and read it and I was like, I'm connected with him. So, and I just reached out to you. So I do appreciate that. Will you stay warm there? I know that it's warmed up a little bit. We're about to get another cold front coming through tonight after a lot of rain. So I'm not looking forward to that, but just hang on. But thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Take care.
Friends, thank you so much for sharing this past hour, more or less, with me and my guest. I most appreciate you listening in and hopefully learning something new as well. If you are feeling extra warm and fuzzy today, please share this podcast with your family, friends, and anyone else that might enjoy our conversations. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of the day.